First of all, get this in your mind. Today's story happened 3,000 years ago. Not 300 years ago, which in many places you would have a different culture. Just 300 years ago, even here in the States that we have today, this is 3,000 years ago. Get your mind around that. That's part of understanding the culture. You have no idea what the culture was back 3,000 years ago without some history and understanding and to know what happened. And we only get this by what was recorded at the time. 3,000 years ago, Israel wanted a king like the other nations had. They did not have a king. What was their system of governance? It was a theocracy. God spoke to the prophet told them, but they didn't like the prophets, they want a king. All the other nations had a king, we want a king too. And they became so insistent that they wanted a king, that God said, okay, I'll let you have a king. Samuel, 1 Samuel 8, 18 through 19, and open your Bibles to Samuel today. Samuel tried to talk them out of it. And you can read those verses in 1 Samuel 8, 18 through 19. He tried to talk them out. He said, you don't want a king. He said to them, if you get a king, you're going to be ruled like a king. He's going to take all your stuff. You're going to be in captivity. I mean, you don't want to let me give you wisdom. You don't want a king. Did they listen to Samuel? Nah. They wanted a king anyway. So Samuel allowed them a king. And so the first king, represented on the screen, was the people's choice. That was the people's choice. This was not God's choice. Saul was the people's choice. By the way, how did he turn out? How good of a king was he? Read the story there in Samuel. They soon said, oh man, why did we choose Saul? And then there was a young person that arrived on the scene. The first king was the people's choice. That was a disappointment. The second king, however, was God's choice. And God said, okay, we're into this thing. I didn't want you to have kings anyway, but now we're into it. I'm going to choose a king for you. And we know who that king was. That king started early in his life to build his reputation up. And of course, in kids' stories, we always hear the story of who? David and Goliath. So that's the story that we've heard. And so God chose David, the king. And as God chose David, and people have misinterpreted this text in 1 Samuel 13, 14, they've just completely misinterpreted the text. The text, as David was being installed as king, in 1 Samuel 13, 14 reads this: the Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart. You know what the original language means? You know what that really means? Whose heart is it talking about there? God's heart. All that text has nothing to do with the piety of David. That is not what the text means. The text means God chose someone after God's heart whom he wanted. The possessive there is God's heart. It's not David's heart. It's God's heart. It has nothing to do with the piety of David, by the way, as history will show. David has some problem with piety. And so to try to explain, well, David's the man after God's own heart, so what he did, we can do too, completely misinterprets that. It's God's heart, meaning God said, I want to choose this time. Let my heart be in the choosing. David became a great king and was worshipped like God himself, if you read the story. He could do no wrong. So get this in your mind before we look at the story. According to the people, David could do no wrong. David was elevated by the people higher than God ever wanted him to be elevated. And this enters into the story, this context. The culture of the day, what was it like, the culture of the day? The culture of the day, life was taken easily in that culture. You mean in Israel culture? Yes. All the cultures. Life could be taken like what? It meant nothing. Remember, you've got to keep this in your mind to understand the story that we're going to look at. Life could be taken very easily. That culture of the day was like other kings in the cultures around them. One word from the king, and your life could be wiped out. No, Pastor, you're talking about the cultures around Israel. No, I'm not. One word from the king, and you're gone. You're killed right on the spot. That's the culture of the day, including the culture in Israel. Life, just like that. Word of the king. God. See why Samuel told him you don't want a king? And another thing that we look at, the background, like other cultures around them, kings had harems. Every culture. Kings had harems. And it was no different with the Israelites as it was with any other culture. Kings had